How about now?
Yeah, there you can hear me.
Yep. How's it going, man?
Good. I was stuck backstage. You're the
Okay. So this is how this works. I have to preface everything because I invite like anybody on here. I just got to preface it with this. You don't have to sign anything, but everything that is discussed, it has to come from charity. We have to be very cordial, respectful, try not to interrupt each other, and just try to come to, an ecumenical, I don't know, understanding, not agreement, but just an understanding of the other person. Because I think, were you the one that I was going back and forth with on Jay Dyer's channel?
Yeah, we were chatting for a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah.
I
So,
come up to see if you had changed your mind on that at all, or what your thoughts were. So,
change. So, what do you mean by change my mind? Like on how I read
so
Lumen Gentium or what?
yeah, no worries. You're kind of breaking up a little bit on my end. I'm sorry, but
That's okay.
yeah, the premise was the statement that Roman Catholics say that Muslims have the same God as them. So would you agree that they have the same God, that you guys worship the same God?
So, okay, so you quoted Lumen Gentium first, and then you quoted St. John Paul II. So Lumen Gentium does not use that language. I will concede to you that St. John Paul used the word the same God, but then he qualified it in the way like Nostra Aetate would qualify it, or Lumen Gentium would qualify it, basically saying we believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one creator, the one merciful God who will judge mankind at the end of time. In that sense, yes, but in Lumen Gentium, I think it was Lumen Gentium, or no, Nostra Aetate.
It was both.
Yeah, Nostra Aetate, it says right there that they don't believe that Jesus is God. You know what I mean? So it's like this, right? To believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like you don't, or just to adore that God, if your worship isn't true worship and the object isn't clear but distorted, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not adoring the same God. It's just distorted and it's missing the target. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand the claim. I would just say that if you're not worshiping the Trinity, you're not worshiping the same God, especially if you willfully reject it. You know what I mean?
So the willfully rejecting it. Okay, hold on to that because that's going to be your best argument. So, and forgive me, I know this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but are you Eastern Orthodox?
No, I'm not. I'm Protestant.
Okay. So because Eastern Orthodox will claim that the Jews, or just the patriarchs, the Jews, the Israelites, they wittingly, knowingly worshipped the Trinity and believed in the Trinity.
I agree. I think the patristic witness says the same. Like Ambrose, I think I sent you that citation. Ambrose states that Abraham worshipped the Trinity as a type. So yeah, he might not have had explicit doctrinal understanding, like the specifics.
Right.
He worshipped him as a type.
Absolutely. 100% agreed. So but that's the thing, like their worship, right? Their liturgical worship was lacking efficacy. They didn't, the killing of the bulls and goats didn't take away sins, right? God was not pleased with their sacrifices. And, we could go through the whole shebang, right? But like you said, the Jews, the Israelites, the patriarchs, whatever, they did believe in the triune God. I would agree with you. It's not a different God, but you have to understand the way they worshiped and how that God was, defined and articulated wasn't the Christian Trinity, like Council of Nicaea and all the Christological Trinitarian definitions. So in that sense, we could say the Jews absolutely believed in the same God that the Christians do. But the Jews, like using your argument, explicitly reject Trinitarian worship or just a Trinitarian God. So do we believe in the different God?
than the Old Testament Jews. I mean, they worship the Trinity, just wasn't fully revealed yet. I'd say there's definitely a difference between worshiping the Trinity as a type, right? Like you're still worshiping the Trinity, versus willfully rejecting Christ, right? So you're rejecting Christ's divinity absolutely. You reject the Son, you reject the Father. I mean, you're not worshiping the same God. You're worshiping a God of your own creation at that point.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's the issue that I have with the language. And when we were chatting a little bit earlier, I was citing Lumen Gentium, and I believe Jay brought up Nostra Aetate. I think I posted a copy paste from Lumen Gentium, and he posted Nostra Aetate, because it's there both in both citations. In
Okay.
Lumen Gentium, the language is slightly different. It says, in the first place amongst these are the Muslims. Here, I'll read the whole sentence. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But the plan of salvation also includes those who acknowledge the Creator. In the first place amongst these are the Muslims, who, professing to hold the faith of Abraham, along with us, adore the one and merciful God.
Okay. Oh, were you done, or should I? Can
Yeah.
I?
That's Lumen Gentium. That one.
Well, I will say this: the word "profess" precedes both of those things. So again, and I'm not saying like the Catholic Church or Lumen Gentium or whatever is, being very vague and ambiguous, but when they're professing to believe in can you reread that? They profess to believe in the same faith of Abraham and adore the same God, right?
Yeah. It says, professing to hold the faith of Abraham, comma, along with us adore the one and merciful God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the whole professing, because like a Mormon or a Hindu could profess to believe in the God of Abraham and to worship the God of Abraham. Doesn't necessarily make it true, right?
Right. I would say they don't worship the same God, especially Mormons. If you know anything about what they believe with the whole space thing, like,
oh, I know enough to know that I'm just gonna, you know what? I'm gonna bite my tongue. I think
they're very, man.
well, we have a Mormon in the chat, so just
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I will pray for your conversion, my friend.
Yeah, and I'm sure he'll pray for our conversion to the Mormon Church.
Yeah, that's all good. So, on what were we just discussing? Lumen Gentium. So you don't have any issue with that language there? Along with us adore the one and merciful God.
No, only because of the qualifications. So, and you might take that as like a cop out, right? I get it. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. But when you take everything together and the qualifications, like, well, what do you mean by adoring? Again, it doesn't say the same God. I know St. John Paul II said that. It says the one merciful God. Well, really what that is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? I'm sorry, go ahead. What's that?
I would say which I would say is the Trinity, right?
Yes. So, but what you got to understand is believing in the same God is possible with believing in in the God that has. I'm sorry, let me rephrase it. You can believe in the same God, but believe different things about that God. Okay. So, and again, that might sound really heretical to you, but that's where it comes back to, like, if you think before the revelation of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, the old covenant people, right? They believed in the Trinity like you agreed with me. But they didn't know that there was an unbegotten Father generating a begotten Son and then spirating a Holy Spirit. You know what I mean? Like that. So I'm saying it's a weak analogy. I'll give you that, but it's analogous to Mormons. They profess, okay, that's what Lumen Gentium says. They profess to believe in the same, not the same, you see, you got me saying it, in the one merciful God, that God being of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, just like the Jews, right? Now, if they get something wrong on the nature of God or their liturgical worship, if you call it that, their worship is really just one of prayer and of the book. But nonetheless, they profess to believe and adore in the one merciful God, insofar as it's monotheistic, the monotheistic God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that it's that God is the creator of all things. It's God is merciful and will judge mankind on the last day. Notice in all those things you quoted, and I brought this up, it never talked about the hypostatic union of Christ, the eternal word, and Christ's human nature, never talked about the Father begetting the Son, and never talked about the procession of the Holy Spirit. It just said in these ways we adore the one merciful God. Does that make any sense? A little? Just a little?
Yeah, I think that's the entire point, though, right? Is that they don't accept the Trinity. So if they don't accept the Trinity, they're not worshiping the same God, because our God is the Trinity, right? Christ is God, right? Fully God, fully man. If you reject the Father, if you reject the Son, you reject the Father, right? So that's kind of that's the piece. That is the key. I mean, I know that this statement, to be completely charitable, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that this statement isn't saying that they have God in his fullness. I know it's not saying that they have, salvation if they stay in Islam or whatever the case may be. That's not making any claims about that. The issue that I have is God is the Trinity. It's not something that you can just take and separate from him as like an attribute, right? You either have God in his absolute divine simplicity, right? You have him in his whole, or you don't have him, right? It's not like you can take bits and pieces of him ontologically and separate them out and say, okay, well, I've still got God here. No, you've got an idol of your own creation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that we can rightly say that Muslims have the same God as Christians if they deny the Trinity, because the Trinity is God. There's a difference with the Old Testament Jews, right? Old Testament Jews, it's not completely revealed to them yet. With the Muslims, they are absolutely rejecting the Trinity outright, and they're rejecting Christ as being divine. I don't think that if you can, because our God is Jesus Christ, right? I don't think if you're rejecting God,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, what do you mean by our God is Jesus Christ?
right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Okay.
Christ, fully man, fully God.
Yeah. I got you.
Right. You can't take a piece of God out, right? You can't like splice them up and make them composite and remove pieces. You know what I mean? He's divinely simple.
Okay. No, I'm surprised you know about divine simplicity. I don't think many Protestants, I mean, Eastern Orthodox, they reject that. But
yeah, their essence energy distinction.
Yeah. So there's a thing called natural theology, natural revelation, natural worship. Have you ever heard of any of that? Like Romans?
It talks about that in the next couple of sentences right after the one I cited, Lumen Gentium.
Right.
Or you want to read that sentence there? It says,
Go ahead. Yeah.
those also can attain to salvation who through no fault of their own do not know the gospel of Christ or his church, yet sincerely seek God, and moved by his grace, it doesn't say his, moved by grace, strive by their deeds to do his will, as it is known to them through the dictates of conscience. So,
Sure.
no fault,
Go ahead.
I guess, would be the linchpin there.
Okay. Can I share something on our screen?
All right, what you got for me?
Okay, so again, this is St. Thomas Aquinas and his gospel commentaries. Okay, so I'm not saying like, you have to believe this or whatever, but this to me is the best explanation of how to qualify at least Lumen Gentium, Nostra Aetate, and the John Paul II quote you gave me. So if you remember, I think you were alluding to it in John 5, right? Where it talks about if you dishonor the Son, you dishonor the Father, right? If you don't accept the Son, if you don't honor the Son, you dishonor the Father, right? You with me?
Yep, follow.
Okay. All right. So this is what St. Thomas Aquinas has to say on that, because in relevance to our discussion on Muslims and or Jews worshiping the Trinity. Okay. So this is what he says. And this has to do with natural revelation and natural religion, okay? So he says, quote, "For it is one thing to honor God precisely as God, and another to honor the Father. For someone may well honor God as the omnipotent and immutable creator without honoring the Son." That's the Jews and the Muslims, okay? So hold on. "But no one can honor God as Father without honoring the Son. For he cannot be called Father if he does not have a Son. But if you dishonor the Son by diminishing his power, this also dishonors the Father. Because where you give less to the Son, you are taken away from the power of the Father." So the thing that I would focus on is right here. This kind of alludes to that natural revelation, natural religion aspect. You can honor God, you can believe in God or worship God without honoring the Father. For someone may well honor God as what? Omnipotent and immutable creator without honoring the Son. So what he's saying really is what like St. Paul was saying in Romans 1, and then in Acts, I think it's 17. If you remember the pagans with the altar and it was inscribed to an unknown God.
Talks about that in Lumen Gentium. That's actually the comparison that they make.
Yeah.
The issue that I have with that comparison is you have on one end individuals who have no knowledge at all of the Trinity, right? You have no knowledge at all of the Son, versus you have Muslims who willfully reject the Trinity, willfully reject the Son. So there's a bit of a difference in that nuance, right? You have people who are willfully, and I get what you're saying, and I understand. I'm trying to be as charitable as possible and get your whole perspective here. But even if you were to look at the like caveat in Lumen Gentium where it says, "No fault of their own, do not know the gospel of Christ or his church," right? That doesn't really apply to most Muslims. I mean, most Muslims understand Christ. They just reject him, right? He's just a prophet. I mean, if you read the writings like the Hadiths, the Quran, I mean, it specifically talks about Jesus. He is not God, right? He's just a prophet.
So yeah, of course. I'd ask you, do the Jews, well, what branch of Judaism, but would you say the Jews worship the triune God? I mean, I'm not talking before the incarnation.
Are you talking like modern day?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Not, I mean, religious Judaism adherents, right? As separating the like race, right? Because you can have Christian Jews, right? Like all the apostles were Jews, but those that reject Christ, absolutely not. I don't think they worship the same God either. I think that's pretty evident when you read the Talmud and different books like that, where they say Jesus is boiling in poop in hell and he's a necromancer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they worship the same God. I think they're, worshiping a false idol.
Yeah, I think they have different understandings and interpretations of who God is and how to worship him. That's what I think it comes down to, because they profess like, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all profess, right, to believe in and worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that God is like the creator and the judge of all mankind. And that's basically what it's saying. It's saying like, what kind of monotheistic commonalities do we have? And so you could obviously retort with, well, gosh, I mean, there's commonalities in all different kinds of religions. Well, those religions aren't monotheistic. You know what I'm saying? They're not. Hindu, that's not monotheism. Confucianism, whatever. Like, I would say, like, these three are the three monotheistic religions that profess to believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Can I give you a hypothetical?
Sure, man.
So let's say in this hypothetical, I profess, all right, I have a religion. Let's say it's a big religion in whatever whatever false reality we're in. All right. So the religion, I don't know, name it whatever you want. All right. I call it Brickle Brackle or whatever. All right. I say I worship the same God as Abraham, but my God is pink and fluffy and has a big elephant trunk. But I say it's the same God as Abraham, right? I'm monotheistic, right? I believe in I call him God the Father, right? But I reject Jesus Christ. I reject the Trinity. I know about both those things, but I willfully reject both of them. But my God is pink and fluffy, with maybe like a clown poof hair and a long elephant trunk. Am I worshiping the same God as Christians?
Well, here's the thing, right? Are you professing to believe in the God? Like, so was your hypothetical, these people confess or profess rather to believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that they're monotheistic? It just happens to be this pink unicorn thing or whatever. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah.
So again, are they, right, willfully believing not in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? So my question is just this. They claim to be monotheistic, right? Even though, that there's only one God, but this one God's a pink unicorn.
Right.
That, right?
Well, that is God the Father. That's what they would say in this made up religion. So like that's the God. That's the God of, that's the God of Abraham. We profess that we believe the same thing, right? Or maybe not the same thing, but that we profess to believe in the God of Abraham, but we just say he's a big pink fluffy unicorn with an elephant trunk and a clown afro. Would you say that they're
but see, okay, but see, there's the thing that they have a misunderstanding of who God is, even though their intention is to worship and to profess the religion of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, like, if you have a bullseye, right, and you're, trying to throw your liturgical worship dart at that target, the target's God, and you don't even know what it looks like or whatever. You have like distorted perceptions of it, and then your dart, right, obviously is not going right at the dartboard. It's going all over the place because you reject and dishonor the Son and all that stuff. But the fact remains is that they monotheistically believe and adore the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Does that make some sense?
So you would say, I get what you're saying. You're saying that they still worship the same God, even though they believe that it's a pink unicorn with an elephant trunk. It's just they're kind of off.
So I personally wouldn't say the same. Okay, so if I'm quoting Lumen Gentium and I'm quoting Nostra, Aetate, it doesn't use the word same. Again, I know we could quibble over nuances of meanings and words. I get it. Okay. But St. John Paul II used that word, but he qualified it. And same how? Well, we believe in one God. Oh, okay. We believe in the God of Isaac or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We believe in the one merciful, judge of mankind, all that stuff, right? But it doesn't say the same God in Vatican II or other magisterial documents.
It says together we worship the one, or along with us, they worship the one and merciful God. So, I mean, it's basically the same thing. Together with us, worship the one and merciful God. And then,
well, go ahead.
They adore the one God. Right, and that's Nostra Aetate. Lumen Gentium is along with us, not together with us. I apologize. Along with us, adore the one and merciful God.
Right.
Perfect.
And but you get, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So, and I know that we can go back and forth on that, but the issue that I have here is, you look at the Israelites when they're setting up the golden calf. They said this is the God of Israel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And God didn't consider that worship of himself. He considered it idolatry. That was a golden calf. That's not me. I'm not that pink fluffy unicorn with an elephant trunk.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same God, right? That's an idol. So I think if you corrupt who God is ontologically, right? So like the denial of the Trinity, those types of things,
Mm-hmm.
you're not worshiping the same God. I mean, it'd be the
Yeah.
same, doing that golden calf or pink elephant with, whatever I said earlier.
So on the surface, on the letter of the law, like ontologically black and white, okay. But you got to also understand though, like there are elements of ignorance, whether it's culpable or non-culpable, that's for another day, but there is some sort of ignorance that can play into that. That's why Lumen Gentium says through no fault of their own, right? So I think you're encapsulating like this whole religion, like with every single person, like that they just willfully, knowingly reject and dishonor, like the Son, or just because they don't confess to believe like the Nicene Creed, that through that they aren't at least trying to, because it's an attempt, right? It's a profession. They profess and adore the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They just do it in a wrong way, and they don't have like that full revealed nature of God and who he is and all that stuff. That's what I would say.
So even though that they woefully reject God, who he is, they reject the Son, they're still worshiping the same God somehow. Even though they don't have the Trinity, that's who God is ontologically. They could be worshiping a pink fluffy unicorn with a long elephant trunk, and it would still be the same God as long as they professed it. They were monotheistic and they professed that they're worshiping the same God of Abraham. We could say they're worshiping the same God. They're just off a bit. Is that?
I mean, the analogy kind of backfires, I think. I'm just saying, because the Jews, patriarchs, Israelites of the old covenant, you will clap back and say, well, it wasn't revealed to them. Okay, that's fine. That's fair. I agree with you. But they still worshiped and believed in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even though they didn't profess a belief in, the Son and the Holy Spirit, and they didn't liturgically worship him. See, your worship is obviously different than mine. That's okay, and whatever. But they didn't worship him the way that God is to be worshipped. You know what I mean? So that's my. Go ahead.
But when they erected the golden calf and they said that this is God, this is the God of Israel, right? God didn't say, hey, you guys were really close. He didn't say you guys were so close. There's like a bullseye and you're kind of like just a little bit off to the side. He's like, no, you're worshiping a false idol. And then he, started wiping some of them out.
Yeah. I think you're, because you keep saying willfully reject. And I think you got to be a little careful, because Lumen Gentium, right after this says like through no fault of their own. That's what we would call invincible ignorance. Because
Right.
there are Jews, there are Muslims, okay? So the monotheistic religions. There are even non-monotheistic religions, and even atheists and agnostics, naturally, right? Through grace, you can't do it can believe in God in a certain sense, okay? I know this sounds really like a New Age indifferentism, but but they have elements of sanctification and truth. So, for instance, like us Catholics, the closest church, I don't want to say religion, The closest church to us is the Eastern Orthodox, or just the Eastern Apostolic churches, in terms of divine revelation, sacraments, liturgy, all that stuff. Then outside of them, you could probably go to the high church Protestants, and then so on and so forth down the line. And then outside of that, Judaism, Islam, because they're monotheistic. Then you go outside of these are concentric circles. Then you go out of that, then you got Hinduism and Confucianism and whatever. And then you get agnosticism. And then you go out again, and then you get atheism. You know what I mean? But in each one of those concentric circles, through invincible ignorance, so you're not willfully rejecting. There are people in every one of those circles that are not willfully and knowingly rejecting the hypostatic union of the eternal word and the humanity of Christ. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, I get that. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, right, that I grant that to you, right? I don't believe that, but for the sake of argument, let's just say I grant it.
Yeah.
The Muslims that actually willfully reject the Trinity, know about the Trinity, say, no, it's too confusing, I reject it, because that's their argument always. Oh, Trinity too confusing, 3, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, you're polytheist, that kind of thing. So let's say they willfully reject Christ, right? He's not God. That's what they say. They say he's just a prophet. They willfully reject him. They willfully reject the Trinity. They have full knowledge. They are not ignorant. They understand it. Are they still worshiping the same God? Hold on 1 second. While you answer that, I'm going to look at something. Go ahead.
Well, I'm actually going to pull something up for you. But Scholasticus, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, hey, how you doing, man?
I'm good.
So, clinging to antiquity, this is our good friend Scholasticus. He participates in my live streams, so he's more knowledgeable than I am. So I'm going to pull something up, but if you guys want to, you don't have to, but.
Can you do me while you pull that up? I'll be right back. I got to grab a charger right quick.
Yeah.
I'll be right back. Just a second.
What do you got, Scholasticus? Anything?
So if I had to systematically address this issue, I'd just say, so basically what the disputed claim is that those who positively err, which is to say they not just err through a matter of ignorance or the lie or in good faith, but those who positively err in theology cannot worship God in reality, because no such entity with all the things they attribute to God exists.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I'd respond to that is kind of by doing an opposite analogy. So, for instance, in post-Tridentine Baroque theology, there was this dispute over what the precise thing doesn't really matter. There was a dispute over what the constituent of the metaphysical divine essence was, which is basically what divine attribute is logically first, from which all the other divine attributes logically proceed. This is a bit oversimplified, but within Thomism, there were some who said it was divine intellection, and there were others who said it was pure subsistent being. So let's say that the divine intellection option is true, because I think that's the better founded option for reasons that are beyond this. It would be absurd to say that the Thomists, the people that fellow Catholics who err on this matter, which is a matter of natural theology that Revelation, I'm pretty sure, does not touch on to any degree, and the church permits both opinions, to say that they worship different deities because they err on a matter of theology that is seemingly so slight. I mean, of course, it's important to have correct theology, but the point is that we don't worship our conceptions of things. We worship the things themselves. Yeah. So Muslims don't worship their conception of God, because we both agree that no entity with all the things that Muslims attribute to God exists, right? Because they would say that God is not Trinitarian, and the like. So we would agree on that, but that's not what Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium are claiming. They're just claiming that they worship the one true deity because they intend, through natural theology, to worship the first principle of reality, the creator of heaven and earth, the judge of the living and the dead, etc. And because of that intention, regardless of their errors on theology, their errors are... So basically, there's different orders. There's an order within our will, basically. We have the supreme object of our will is goodness itself, right? But we can err concerning what is actually good. This is what happens when every time someone commits a sin, they err concerning what, if not doctrinally, at least practically, concerning what is actually good. But they're still willing goodness itself because their will for goodness is more logically prior and fundamental in relation to their will to do a contingent action. So we'd say that their will to worship the one deity is is fundamental relative to their errors in theology. So you could also say they will to worship a non-Trinitarian being. Well, if that were their fundamental intention, then that would invalidate their worship of God, because no such non-Trinitarian deity exists in reality, because the only true deity is Trinitarian. However, prior to their intention to worship God prior to their intention to worship something which in actuality doesn't exist, they intend to worship the God of St. Abraham, if that makes any sense.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. So the first principle, right? Natural theology for the first principle, right? Regardless of knowing the theological attributes of that which you are worshiping or at least believing in, right? Your intent there is good and chaste insofar as you're worshiping God in a natural way, right?
Yes, and we also wouldn't say that, assuming culpability on the part of the individual, that we wouldn't say that Islamic worship is pleasing to God. It's actually gravely offensive to God and avails only onto their damnation. So, yeah, we're not saying that, Islam is itself a means of salvation, a means of communicating grace, because it contains in it several heresies, such as the denial of God's Trinitarian personality and other errors.
Well, let me go ahead and respond to that, if that's all right. So you made a couple of statements. You said they don't worship the concept; they worship the one deity. Okay, so does that apply to every religion that is monotheistic, or are they just worshiping the same God as the Christians, because there is only one God?
Oh, was that to me?
No. What's that?
Oh,
sorry.
We'd say that I think it would be fine to say that, as long as they don't intend to not worship the God of St. Abraham. So if they say we worship the first principle of reality, which is the God of St. Abraham, they say we don't identify that first. We think that the God of St. Abraham is something else from the first principle, and we don't worship that. Unless they have some prior intention which invalidates their worship of he who is the first principle, then they could be said to worship God in a natural sense, at least.
Okay, so if they accept, so there's a couple of things you said. If they accept he's the first principle, right? They're worshiping, their intention is to worship the God of Abraham, and they're not like doing like a flying spaghetti monster, like gotcha, like the atheists do sometimes. So they don't worship the concept, they worship the actual deity. They profess to worship the God of Abraham. and they consider him, he's the creator, he's the first principle, and all of that. If those things are in place and they're monotheistic, then they're worshiping the same God. Maybe not perfectly, they're like kind of off, but they're worshiping the same God. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. So if I were to have a religion, and I were to say that, okay, I've accepted all of those things, I believe that I'm worshiping the God of Abraham, he's the creator, I'm monotheistic, it's only him, and I'm completely earnest in my faith, but like, I don't know if you see that, that's my God there. I say that's the God of Abraham. Would I be worshiping the same God?
So in that case, you're saying that, like, if someone's errors on theology are so obviously egregious that in no meaningful way could we say that someone who worships a paper elephant worships the true deity. That's what you're saying, basically.
Well, like I'm altering in my mind God ontologically. I'm rejecting parts of him. Okay, so not only, I mean, let's just say that this isn't actually him. This is just a depiction of God, right? Obviously, that's not what I believe. Lord, forgive me. But let's say that in this fake religion, this is what I consider to be the God of Abraham. I'm monotheistic. Am I worshiping the same God? If I say my God is a pink elephant with a unicorn horn?
Well, I'd say it would depend on which intention is prior. If your intention to worship the God of Saint Abraham is prior, and only contingent upon that would you identify the piece of paper with the God of Saint Abraham, then would say yes, fundamentally, even if your contingent intention actually contradicts that. But if they intend to worship the paper logically prior to saying, oh, and I worship this piece of paper, and this piece of paper just happens to be the God of Saint Abraham, allegedly, then you wouldn't be. And to kind of respond to this, I'd actually like to hear your response to another basically the opposite analogy. So, like, are you familiar with the controversy as to the length of time that the Israelites spent in Egypt before the Exodus?
No, go ahead with your.
So there's basically a controversy over the interpretation of St. Paul's words, where some say that what's called the long sojourn view, which is that they sojourned in Egypt for 430 years. Some hold the short sojourning view, which is, I believe, 260 years or so. Would you say that someone can, assuming they're acting in good faith, and want to adhere to the true doctrine of Scripture, that there would be a lawful variance of opinion on that Christians could take both sides in good faith?
Okay.
If only one of them can be actually correct.
Yeah, I mean, you're not necessarily changing who God is ontologically, though, are you? You're just having a theological disagreement? Or did I miss something? I'm sorry.
Well, in that, I'd say that... So let's say the long sojourn view is true. I actually don't really have much of an opinion on this. I haven't really researched it, but it's just an example. So in actuality, there is God who permitted the Israelites to sojourn in Egypt for 430 years. There is no such entity in reality which permitted the Israelites to sojourn in Israel for only 260 years, because in reality, the one true God permitted them to sojourn for 430 years. So if erring positively on theology would invalidate one's worship of God, even though they fundamentally intend to worship the true deity, then it would follow that because they err concerning this particular question of providence, that they're worshiping something other than the one true deity, because they're worshiping something, because they attribute to that entity, they attribute to God something that God has not actually done. They're worshiping something which couldn't actually be God, because God in this case only permitted the Israelites to sojourn for 430 years rather than merely 260.
Sure. I mean,
do you get what I'm like trying to say?
You're worshiping a different God. That's just a difference of theology. You're saying, well, did God actually do it for this amount of time, or did he do it for this amount of time? Right? It's not something changing who he is, right? Like if I were to say, like, I don't know, let's say I reject divine simplicity. I'm even going to go outside of essence energy distinction. So now I'm going on to who God is ontologically. If I were to say, like, I don't know, I'm going to use this piece of paper because I've already drawn this hideous elephant on it. Okay, so let's say, all right, if I were to say, like, okay, God is composite. He's composed of these two things. I'm worshiping a different God. God's not composite, right? I'm changing him ontologically, okay, in the way that I profess. If I were to say that, God is not spirit, he is this elephant, or maybe this is just how I depict him or something. I'm not worshiping the same God. If I deny the Trinity, right, which is who God is, right, you can't have God without the Trinity. God is the Trinity ontologically. I can't break them up into little pieces and say, okay, well, you've got like some of God here, or like you've got like some of God here. Like you've got one of them, right? So I've now like split him up somehow mentally. I'm not worshiping the same God. I mean, if you look at the Old Testament, and I'll give the same example with the golden calf. I mean, look at God's response. Said, you've made yourself a. Hold on, let me pull that up. Basically, he said you made yourself your own God. They said these are our gods, O Israel, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt. So they intended to worship the golden calf as if it was God, right? Okay, so they've made their own false conception of God, and they're worshiping it. And what did God say it was? So that's an idol, man. That's not me. That's not who I am. You're rejecting who I am. I am. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Or
Yes, I understand that, and we can get to the golden calf maybe a bit later, but because I'd actually dispute that let's get to that later. But so you said you believe in divine simplicity, correct?
Yeah.
So as a consequence of divine simplicity, everything which we attribute to God is really identical to the divine essence. So we'd say that the divine attributes are only conceptually distinct from one another, that they're really identical.
Yeah, there's not a real distinction, otherwise God would be composite.
Yes. So then in that case, for instance, God's will to permit the Israelites to sojourn in Egypt for a certain amount of time would be really identical to the divine essence. And therefore, if you erred concerning what God's will really was, you would be erring concerning the nature of God himself. So how would, in that case, a variance of opinion be lawful and not invalidate worship of the true God, whereas in a more direct case, at least logically, but not really, that would then invalidate the worship of the true deity?
Hold on just a second, guys. Sorry to interrupt you. I don't mean to interrupt you. I do have to go in about 5 minutes. So here's the 5-minute final warning or whatever.
All right. My closing message. My Muslim friends, please accept Christ.
Of course. Of course.
To answer your question, so you would look at let me throw out an example. So the light on Mount Tabor, all right, created or uncreated?
I'd say created, because that's what Pope St. Leo says.
Okay, so it's a created what? What would you classify that as?
I'm pretty sure it would just be a creature. It would be like physical photons or phota.
Okay, so did God will that to occur?
Yes.
Okay, would you say that since it was since it was created, how do I want to articulate this? Since it was created, right? Is that a part of God ontologically? Because you're saying that his decision, right, in this instance, would affect his ontology. Would you say the same thing here? Is the created light God himself? Because that's what you're claiming about the decision made for the amount of time. If we disagree on that, you're saying we disagree on him ontologically. So is the created light, rather, is that God himself?
The created light itself is not divine.
Okay. So then his decisions, are they God himself?
Well, if you mean, so you're asking, like, are the divine energies or divine operations really distinct?
Like created energies. What would you say? Would you say they are God himself, or operations rather?
Well, there are two ways you could consider that. Actively speaking, they would all be really identical because of, as a consequence of divine simplicity. But passively considered, that is considered in their manifestations in creation, they would be distinct insofar as creatures can be really distinct.
So for the sake of time, though, light on Mount Tabor, is that God himself?
No.
Okay, so then how would we say that his decision in this one instance would be a difference of ontology? I don't think that's a great example. Just because if you were to look at even the created energies, we wouldn't say that is God himself. So a difference of theology of what happened, I wouldn't say is a difference of ontology. I think that's a little bit of a stretch theologically. I understand what you're trying to get at, but I don't think it's quite there. And for the sake of time, I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree. But I appreciate y'all having this conversation with me. God bless you all, and make sure you pray for the Muslims that they become Christians. They're converting at record rates in Iran right now. So
Thanks for coming
All right,
out.
yeah, thank you. It was enjoyable. God bless.
absolutely. God bless. Have a good night.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.